Hello, my friends. My name is Tim, and if you are here to see Follow the Yellow Brick Road or March to the Beat of My Own Drum, you're in the right spot. Yay. Okay. So, one of the things that we are going to talk a little bit about is the idea of the role of experts and how they play a part in the consumption of learning content. So, today we have a very interesting experiment to share with you. It's one of those things where you have, some ideas of how things are going to end up, and then the hypothesis is proven correct. It's very exciting. You're going to love it. Before I get started, I want to introduce who I am and who my partner is. My partner in crime, Rebecca Anderson, who is our Learning Solutions lead at Collegius Education. She's been around for about 16 years doing this kind of thing. She's an expert in pedagogical training, learning management system training and support, master's in education. She also has military support training, and she's also a great coach and academic advisor. So she's been doing some wonderful stuff. She's been working with me for probably like 6 years now. So we've had a great track record, and this is not our first presentation together. And we always find some interesting stuff to report to you. As for me, my name is Tim. I'm the Director of Academic Services for Collegiate Education. I've been around probably too long, 25 years in collegiate education. I've been a campus academic dean, director of faculty development. I've been faculty, and now I direct the academic services at Collegiate Education, which includes things like high flex learning, hybrid learning, online learning, of which we'll talk about later today. So, the idea of following that yellow brick road, right? Kind of going in a curated, chosen path, or this kind of a la carte consumption model, right? And really, that's kind of the question that we had. Really, ultimately, all educators are looking after that one feature, right? Like, how do I increase student outcomes, right? Is there some self-selection that kind of goes into that recipe? Or do the experts know best and their prescription should be followed? Well, we have an interesting experiment, right? So we created a bunch of modules, some learning modules that were self-paced, and these modules were based on one competency at a time, and they took about 45 to 90 minutes to complete. They were asynchronous, and the modules, when you completed them, you had a final assessment that you did, and then if you passed that, you got the certificate, right? And there were some formative assessments that are punctuated throughout, right? And so we created a bunch of these, really based on the market needs, through an aggregator like Burning Glass, figured out which ones were most in demand. And then we set up our experiment, right? Here is the setup, right? Modules were set up either in the learning context of a la carte learning, right? So we opened up all 72 modules. We opened them up to the learners to choose what they would have liked to see, right? What do they want to take? What do they want to consume? And so we gave them a whole year, and we said, look, you've got 12 months from, I think it was July to July. Take as many as you like, ones that you're interested in or predict that you will be necessary for your life, either during college or post college. And then we let them see what happens. Now remember, each one of these is punctuated by formative assessment, and in order to complete it, there was a summative assessment at the end, and that's how we kind of marked student outcomes. If they completed the assessment, outcome complete. If they did not, outcome not complete. And remember, they're self-selecting in. So these are not tied to credits. These experiences are not tied to any kind of reward or anything like that. Just the reward of knowledge. Right? Now contrast that. By the way, that was the beat of your own drum, right? The yellow brick road part, this curated pathway. Students could then choose to engage in a series of 6 modules that were identified by faculty as having synergy together. So a faculty member went through the 72 modules, identified each one of them, and went through the learning outcomes and the competencies and said, I recommend these 6 taken together, right? Because they possess some sort of synergy, they build off of one another, the competencies are somehow interconnected. That expertise provided a idea of, okay, now the student knows what they're doing because they're being guided, right? I love this analogy that was brought up to me one time, so I can't take credit for it, but it was kind of like we thought we were going to have the school of fish kind of analog, right? So when a sea predator comes across some fish in a school, there's just so many, they're going all over the place, and it confuses the predator, and ultimately they get very little or none of the schooled fish. We thought that if you do a la carte, students were just going to say, where am I going? Maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do this. And we were going to have a low kind of consumption student outcome, right? And then, of course, the expertise would be able to say, the pathway would be like, all right, we're going to have these kinds of pathways available. And we think that this is the best route for you to go. So let's take a look at the hypothesis that we created. So students of both groups should perform well because they both were self-selected, right? They both raised their hand and they said, count me in. I see something attractive that I want to do. Let's do that. However, the hypothesis is that the students who consume curated pathway should exhibit higher student outcomes due to the expert guidance provided. So what does that really translate to, right? The idea that the experts in teaching and learning, the faculty, they were able to kind of say, all right, it's one thing to just read a book and then say you've learned, but for maximum student outcomes and maximum learning, we believe this curated pathway is good. And the student said, yeah, I'll give that a try. In this way, expert guidance should outweigh the benefits of self-pacing and time flexing. Because remember, the a la carte way, you had a whole year to do it. There was literally significant time flexing available, right? And we could talk a little bit more about when they chose them. I'm sure you're probably not surprised that many of them chose them to do at the end of the 12 months rather than the beginning, but that's maybe a different study. So here's what we found out, right? We had 300 students in the observed in our outputs, right? The a la carte method yielded 73% completion rate. 73%. That's pretty good, right? So when you take a look at 73%, while these weren't graded on an A, B, C, D, F scale, the idea that they completed, consumed, performed an assessment, we counted that as a win. However, the curated pathway method yielded 87.5 completion rate. So, yes, our hypothesis was proven true. Absolutely. I think what surprised us most about this is that it was kind of close, right? So you had this idea of expertise absolutely winning out over this a la carte method, right? But we were shocked how close it was. When we were kind of forming the hypothesis, we thought to ourselves, well, we should put in there, the kind of delta, the variance in there, and see how long it would take, how what the distance is. And we hypothesized that it actually is going to be like 30%, 40% difference between the two. And that is not what played out with these 300 students. Now, of course, this is not a trend. This is one point in time. However, it was surprising. Now, if you correlate this back into like the old day, right? So like if you wanted to learn something, you would maybe go to your library and check out a book, how to change the oil on my, I don't know, 71 convertible. I don't know. But you would go and find a piece of information that you wanted, consume that learning, consume that content, and then you'll have learned, right? And then she's like, I now have this skill, or I now exhibit this attribute, etc. And then, of course, schooling probably puts a more official, or an official process onto it, right? So you can learn the most advantage. Now, what does this mean for our conclusions, right? Hypothesis proven correct. Students from both groups performed well. Curated path provided higher student outcomes. Clearly, students benefited from the expert guidance provided by the faculty, and the content in the modules were identical. I maybe should have put that in the beginning. It should be told that all these, in both groups, the contents were identical, right? So we had, the content was the same, right? The only thing that was different was there was a curated section, right? So when you self-select, it's true that you will not have as much efficacy or some learning outcomes as much as guided as guided teaching and learning would be. However, I think it's important, and judging from what our conclusions were here, is that people will look at that and say, maybe people could have more of a say in what their learning pathway would be. Now, there are pros and cons to this, right? However, strictly speaking about learning outcomes themselves, the difference is small. It's significantly different, right? But not that much. So if you think back about like what are the benefits of self-selection through the a la carte, right? There's some capitalization on internal motivation, right? So you're leveraging that internal motivation, which of course is highly productive. You have the idea of there's certainly more excitement, and when there's some self investment in that, right? So I've chosen this. You get to have all these kinds of um, psychological advantages when you're choosing your own pathway and you're kind of committed. It's like, well, I already chose this, so I better kind of finish it, kind of thing. On the other hand, you have the curated pathway where you have the pieces of the puzzle expertly put together, right? So it seems like that there is something to be said about the a la carte method, even though our student outcomes were a little bit lower. So, if we have recommendations, right? While students certainly enjoy choosing their own content and consumption method, they will benefit from pedagogical leadership. That's what the data says, right? I mean, more people were successful in our control group. In scenarios where students are working to choose their own study, providing a faculty guide or faculty created best practices can increase outcomes. Well, that makes sense, right? So maybe there's a great answer to be had here by somehow combining both best of both worlds, right? Students also benefit from a prescribed timeline as well as suggested pacing, again, given by an expert faculty, right? You know, I think when we take a look at learning management systems and other ways that we record data about the learning experience, this kind of thing is super popular right now, right? I'm starting to look as if I'm designing an online course, for example, I start to see, where does the data hit a trend, right? X number of students typically fail this third quiz. Oh, there must either be difficult content or there must be, the quiz is untenable or something like that. So imagine using that data to kind of put it into put it in the a la carte section, right? So students who self-select into this, they have notes from the expert, right? Or guide from the teacher or things like that. So you can capitalize on the expertise while still capitalizing um, on the benefits that are given from this a la carte method or the beating of your own drum, as it were, right? So while students may have an intuition on how they'll best learn, they will benefit from the experience and expertise of a professional educator. And if you think about how this played out in this specific circumstance, right? You have self-paced modules, right, that are identical. Right? And so you have these one path which is chosen by the student, and another path which is chosen by a professional educator, right? So that tells me three different things. Number one, first of all, there's a reason why the professional is always involved in this kind of educational practice, because they actually have some expertise that impacts student outcomes and learning. Number two, the idea of a benefit of self-selection or this a la carte method exists. It exists, right? And whether that is psychological in nature, whether that is something where there's some harnessing of that internal motivation that we talked about earlier, those kinds of things are debatable, but they are present, right? Which is why we saw that relatively high student outcome. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the success rates for MOOCs, for example, is very, very, very low. And so obviously this is less intense, but you have the same idea, self-selecting, self-motivating in something that student is interested in. And then the third, by marrying both of those, I think there's some recommendation and some, some further research, obviously, of how can we meld both of those and to what extent, right? And then what kind of yield can we expect? For example, in a future study, what if we tried to combine both of those? Would we see a higher student outcome rate than 85.7? Would it be 90%? Of course, which would be amazing. So these kinds of practices, I think, would be something where we can kind of cross apply. Now, does this apply to credit-bearing courses? For example, that are 16 weeks in length. It might have multiple forms of formative assessments. We don't know. We don't know. But we do know that students, when they can consume small bite-sized pieces that are restricted to one competency, right? This might be the way to go. So, do you want to follow the yellow brick road or travel to the beat of your own drum, right? I mean, I think that we've seen how the data points out that there's some advantages to following that yellow brick road. And until such a point comes where we say to ourselves, how we can actually successfully combine those two. Well, I think the answer to that question is following the yellow brick road will yield higher student outcomes. Thanks for joining us and figuring out, hey, what did this crazy experiment mean? What are the outcomes, and what does it mean for our future? Again, my name is Tim. My colleague Rebecca helped me put this research together, and I am very, very thankful to her because she is one sharp person. And I'm pleased that we got to collaborate on this one. Hopefully, we'll see you at other OLC presentations, and we should have a great time. Until then, enjoy.